Well, good morning and welcome to Open Line. My name is Jordan Rowe. Joining me by phone right now is Dr. Scott Elrick with the Illinois State Geological Survey. Scott, thanks so much for speaking with me today.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Well, back in late April, the New York Times was in southern Illinois for a story about an underground fossil forest, believed to be the largest ever discovered. It's been described as a lost world, a botanical Pompeii. Dr. Elrick, where is this fossil forest, and how long have geologists known about its existence?
That's a good way to start. The size of this thing, I can confirm that without a doubt, it is the largest Pennsylvania age fossil forest that we know of. And where it's located is along a river, and an ancient river at that. It's a river channel that we call the Galatia River, or the Galatia Channel. And three guesses as to where that river channel is named for, and the answer is Galatia, Illinois. It happens to run right underneath there. This river channel and the coal seams that are part of it are about 306, 307 million years old. And the dimensions of this thing and the dimensions of this fossil forest are, this forest is contained on the banks, on the edges of this river channel that runs from Galatia all the way up into Indiana, right by Wabash, Illinois.
How was this fossil forest formed?
That is it's a long, involved answer. I'll try to give a short version. The short version is that just as today, there's a heartbeat of climate that occurs today with glacial and interglacial cycles that are happening today. This is when, as people probably know, Illinois at one point was mostly covered with glaciers. Well, that same heartbeat was happening back in Pennsylvania 307, 306 million years ago, and the death of the coal swamp, the Springfield coal, which was at one point a swamp, the death of that swamp, covering up that swamp, is what is preserving the fossil forest. And when that's happening is during a climate change, and as a result of this change in climate from an ice world, a glacial world, to an ice-free world, an interglacial world. When that occurs, sea level rises up, it brings sediment over on top of the swamp, and it encapsulates it all in place in sort of one go. And if you imagine going to the Wabash River or the Mississippi or Ohio River, if you could imagine rising sea level up and covering over the forests on the banks of the rivers with sediment, that's basically what happened and why we have this huge, huge forest. It's easily, by the way, 50 times or more larger than anything that has been found before.
Dr. Elrick, can you talk about some of the plant life that could be seen in the fossils?
Yeah. If you could imagine taking a walk through the Shawnee National Forest today, actually you don't have to imagine, you can go do it, you would see a whole array of trees and undergrowth and things of that nature. If you went and took a walk through this forest, which we have been able to do because of, and I should pause for a second to give a huge thank you and our appreciation for the coal companies in Southern Illinois and Indiana for allowing us to come and see this. We couldn't do this without them, and we feel privileged to have had them let us into their world. Anyway, the trees that you would see when you go underground and see this forest would be sort of unlike anything that you would recognize today. There's something called scale trees because the bark on the outside looks like scales. When miners have come to us and said, "Hey, we think we found dinosaur skin or a snake," inevitably what it is one of these scale trees. And these things are so different from a modern-day tree. For example, a modern-day tree, the structural integrity or the strength of the tree is coming from the core, the pith of the tree. These trees were very different. Their structural integrity came from the exterior, and their interior was very spongy and soft. So you can imagine these things as 100-foot tall drinking straws, if you will. So the bark would be 8 inches thick. In fact, the bark of those trees is what makes up probably 85 or 90% of the coal that is mined.
There were few animal fossils discovered, save for a few lizards. Why?
That's a good question. When this forest was flooded or inundated and all of the trees preserved, though we describe it sort of as a catastrophic event, catastrophic means two different things depending upon the time scales you're looking at it. when these trees were covered over, it was a gradual process that took many months. Now, in those many months, you were able to cover up the forest with many, many feet of gray shale, which was able to capture the forest in place. But because it took many months, that means that pretty much all the animals of any sort, anything mobile, could pretty much get out of the way. If you were there at the time, sitting in a lawn chair at the edge of the swamp as it was being covered, you could probably stand up every so often, move your chair back, and watch the flood continue. So the trees couldn't move, the plants couldn't move, so we're able to capture that in place, but the animals were able to get out of the way.
I read that the forest can only be viewed from below. Why is this?
Yes. By virtue of being able to have this beautiful exposure in coal mines, what the passageways that we were walking through were the passageways that were sort of rabbited out or chewed away by the mining machines. Consequently, we were walking in the coal seam. But the part that is being preserved, the forest being preserved, is in the roof. And it is the death of the coal swamp that we are seeing that's capturing all of this in one place at one time. So it's the worm's eye view of this forest floor. And what you see in the mine itself is, as you look up at the ceiling, you will see the rooting of trees rooting down into the peat swamp. You'll see the ground cover plants that have been basically plastered in place, covered over by this gray shale. In a few lucky instances, however, where the mining equipment has mined out some of the roof material along with it, and in fact, there's a couple pictures in the New York Times article that show this, you'll see upright trees rooting down into the swamp itself. You'll get not the worm's eye view, I guess, but the small dog view, because there's not that much available to see. But it does give a sense of the three-dimensionality of this deposit.
We're talking with Dr. Scott Elrick of the Illinois State Geological Survey about what we believe to be is the largest fossil forest ever discovered near Glacier, Illinois. And Scott, let me ask you, you mentioned there's mining going on currently in this area. Is this a threat to the fossil forest?
That's a question that always comes up, and in fact, sort of as a little bit of historical background here, we happen to be lucky enough to be the discoverers of the second largest, at least it's second largest now, fossil forest up near Danville, Illinois, in a different coal seam called Perrin coal. And that's the question as I've given talks across the state and elsewhere as to what's going on, how is this preserved, is there any way to see this? And that what you're asking is directly speaks to that. And the answer is the forest itself is embedded in this material, we call it gray shale. And what it is, it's basically siltstones with clay partings or clay particles within that. The nature of that clay within that siltstone means that as you cycle through the seasons, winter to summer, the mine air goes from somewhat dry to certainly very humid, and the clay swells and shrinks and swells and shrinks. And just like you can't rip a credit card in half, but you can work it back and forth, will eventually it break. The same thing happens with those clay particles. As they shrink and swell, they loosen up the roof. So the roof is always constantly spalling off in layers. So everything that we saw, in fact, all the pictures that we were able to take, all the specimens that we were able to note, weeks, months later, they were gone and on the floor. So it's a very ephemeral animal, and it exists today more as pictures and notes than anything else. So one thing to keep in mind is that from the coal company's perspective, the last thing they want to do is bring shale out of the mine because they can't make money on it. So in a way, they were the best sort of fossil preparator you could ask for, because they did their darndest not to disturb the fossils at all because they didn't want them.
But with the forest already crumbling, I guess there's a limited time to see and explore the fossils that remain. Yeah,
that's true. It is dependent on us getting into the mines to see the fossils. There's another aspect to it, though, that sort of a sidelight, I guess, is that because the forest is crumbling, so to speak, or the layers are spalling off, that means that when we come back again, we're able to see layers slightly higher up that we couldn't see before. And obviously, you're not going to go and dig into the roof. You're just observing. So that means that the spalling layers means that you can see more of it, or again, another slice of that forest.
You've talked about climate change, Dr. Elrick, and you mentioned in the Times article that we're able to look at this fossil forest and see that this has happened before. Will this forest help us study climate change today?
That's a good question. I think what it says more than anything else, I mentioned there's a heartbeat, if you will, to climate today of glacial and interglacial cycles that are happening on the scales of 100,000 year sort of intervals, or 100,000 year heartbeat. There's actually other cycles that are existent within that. And we don't think, we're almost certain that we see those same kind of heartbeat signals back in the Pennsylvanian when these coal swamps are around. And in fact, Illinois has something like 70 some odd coal seams. Probably only 50 of them are worthy of any sort of attention from a mineral extraction perspective. 7 of them have been mined and are extensively mined. But each one of those 70 some odd coal seams is representative of one of these glacial intervals, or one of these heart. When we take a look at how the plants have evolved through time and the response to climate, there's a researcher out in Denver, Kirk Johnson is his name. In fact, I think he was quoted in the New York Times article. I believe he's the one who said it, and I may be misquoting here, that plants are crystallized climate. If you think about it, the plants you see here in Illinois versus up in the Arctic versus in the desert are really quite different because they can't go anywhere, so they reflect the climate that they're in. By the same token, we can take a look at the plants that are in these coal swamps, and they change over time. And so for each one of these heartbeats that we see, which are the coal seams, we see changes through time. And there's a large change that occurs at this. There's a boundary, if you will, geologists have named. We give names to the ages, and this is the Missourian-Des Moinesian boundary. And we see a large change at that boundary where these large lycopod trees that I was describing, these kind of telephone pole-sized, 100-foot tall drinking straws, those things go extinct, and they go extinct in quite a wallop. And it seems the reason for this, and there's a lot of other researchers who've been looking at this from different angles. It's like the reason for this is a large change in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. What exactly is causing it, I think, is still a mystery at the moment. But without a question, it is a precipitous change. It's a monstrous change, and we see it reflected in the plant life as well. So, how does that inform us for today? I think, if nothing else, it can give us an insight as to what kind of ecosystem changes we might expect in a world where CO2 is much higher than it has been just 200, 300 years ago. I guess it's more than that, even 500.
Dr. Elrick, is a crew currently exploring the forest?
The forest itself, because it is spread out over the entirety of this large channel, and the channel goes for 100 some odd miles. All of the mines that are present there currently, we have visited and are visiting. It's an ongoing animal. One of the peculiarities of the coal seams and the structure of rock in Illinois, there's a large structure called Illinois Basin. So if you can imagine a series of mixing bowls in your kitchen all stacked up, you cut those mixing bowls in half, look at them from the side, what you would see would be concentric arc. Well, if you imagine that one of those mixing bowls is a coal seam, the coal is shallowest on the edges of the basin and it's deepest in the middle. And that's what we see with the Springfield coal and this channel, this glacial channel where the fossil forest is. And what that means is that where the forest is easy to get at, in other words, where the coal mines have been mining, is where it's been shallow. And there's a large area in the center of this basin where the coal seam is deep that we have not. And as a result, we can't get at it. But as those mines open over time, we will for sure be following their activities and seeing what plants we see and seeing how the ecosystems progress along this channel. So, yes, we've been to it. We continue to do it, and we're looking forward to more mining in the future to see more of it.
Dr. Elrick, what else can you add?
Well, I already mentioned our appreciation to the coal companies to allow us to come in to see this. Really, as I said, we feel very, very privileged to be let in and be able to see this other world. In many respects, I think what we're seeing is the closest that you can get to time travel, able to go back to an ancient landscape and really see it for what it is. It is the worm's eye view of a former world that I think it just can't be beat. It's pretty neat.